Have you ever discovered a secret so dark it could shatter everything you thought you knew about someone you loved? I want to ask you right now, where are you watching this from, and what time is it there? Because what I'm about to share might make you rethink every relationship you've ever trusted, every smile you've ever believed, and every promise that seemed unbreakable. But first, let me take you into a story that begins on a rainy Thursday evening in the city, where the streets glistened under the neon lights, reflecting the chaotic heartbeat of lives colliding without warning. And in the midst of all that, Emily sat alone in her apartment, staring at the tiny blinking cursor on her laptop, her hands trembling as she realized she had been living a lie for months. Her relationship with Daniel, the man she thought she knew better than anyone else, was built on a foundation that had already been rotting beneath her feet, and the truth hit her like a freight train. Daniel had been cheating on her, not with someone fleeting or trivial, but with someone from their inner circle, someone Emily had considered a friend, someone whose laughter had sounded so sincere at countless dinners, someone whose presence had been a comfort in moments Emily now wished she could erase. And as she scrolled through the messages, the evidence piled up like a mountain she could never climb over. A trail of betrayal so meticulously hidden that she realized Daniel had spent months, maybe years, crafting a double life where Emily's love was taken for granted while he chased thrill and deceit. And the anger bubbling inside her was only half of what consumed her. Was also disbelief, heartbreak, and a chilling clarity that she could no longer allow him to continue, not unchallenged. And that night, as rain pelted the windows with a rhythm that matched her racing thoughts, Emily made a decision that would change everything. She would not confront him with tears or accusations. She would let the world witness his unraveling. A quiet, precise, devastating revenge that would leave no corner untouched and no ally unshaken. And it began with observation. The careful study of his habits, his routines, the subtle ways he thought he could hide behind charm and confidence. Because she knew that to destroy a man like Daniel, who believed himself untouchable, she would need more than anger. She would need patience, strategy, and an understanding of his weaknesses so intimate that every move she made would strike where it hurt the most. And Emily started small, attending the same social gatherings, pretending oblivion while taking note of every whisper, every glance, every secret exchange that Daniel believed went unnoticed, cataloging his lies like a detective documenting a crime scene. And she found comfort in knowing that he had underestimated her, that his ego would blind him to the storm building quietly in the corner of their shared life. Because Emily realized that revenge was not just about exposure, was about transformation, about turning her own pain into power. And as she moved through the city streets that night, a plan forming in her mind like a chessboard laid out across decades, she felt a surge of control she had never experienced before, the kind that comes not from hatred, but from a resolve so focused that nothing else could intrude. And over the following weeks she executed the first stage of her plan, subtle manipulations of his digital footprint, planting doubts in the minds of people he trusted, all while maintaining the illusion of ignorance, laughing in his presence, smiling at the betrayal that only she could see, because she knew that Daniel's arrogance would be his downfall, that the very network he had spun to protect his secrets would become the web in which he would inevitably become entangled. And each interaction, each seemingly innocuous comment, was a brushstroke in the larger portrait of his destruction. Every lie he told being mirrored back at him, every betrayal he committed being reflected in the careful design of Emily's retaliation. And as the days turned into weeks, she noticed subtle shifts, minor cracks appearing in his confidence, fleeting moments of hesitation that Emily savored, because they were proof that her strategy was working, proof that patience and precision were more lethal than anger alone. And she also began to record everything, capturing messages, encounters, and admissions that Daniel thought were private, constructing a narrative so undeniable that when the time came, she would wield it with the authority of someone who had been wronged but had refused to be broken. And she became a ghost in her own life, present but unseen, nurturing the perception of a woman, still naive, still loving, while in reality, she was orchestrating a downfall that would be catastrophic in its inevitability. And during this period, she found herself reflecting on the nature of trust and the illusions people create to shield themselves from discomfort. And she realized that Daniel's betrayal was more than personal. It was systemic, built on the arrogance of someone who believed himself superior, untouchable, and untethered by the consequences of morality. And Emily decided she would teach him the cost of underestimating someone who had been invisible only because she chose to be. And as she delved deeper, she discovered that his cheating was not just physical, but financial and emotional. A tangled web that implicated colleagues, friends, and even distant relatives who had believed in his integrity. And this revelation added layers to her revenge, transforming it from a simple act of exposure into a campaign that would dismantle every pillar he had built his life upon. And Emily moved with stealth, attending parties, mingling at networking events, creating subtle alliances with people Daniel had disrespected, offering a friendly ear here, a seemingly innocent conversation there, all while planting seeds of doubt that would grow silently, until the man who thought himself untouchable would begin to crumble under the weight of his own misdeeds. And one evening, after months of careful observation and minor provocations, she initiated a key move, a calculated leak that suggested a betrayal within his business circle, something Daniel had believed secure. And the reaction was immediate: confusion, suspicion, the first real cracks of panic appearing in his usually flawless facade. And Emily watched from the safety of anonymity, feeling the thrill of anticipation, knowing that patience had brought her closer to the climax, the moment when all the pieces would align. And in the meantime, she kept her personal life outwardly intact, maintaining appearances, reinforcing the illusion that she had no awareness, because every misstep in visibility could compromise the delicate balance of her plan. And she also discovered something unexpected in her journey: the empowerment that came from reclaiming control, the strength that rose from suffering and observation. And this inner transformation gave her an almost cinematic clarity, allowing her to anticipate moves before they happened, to read intentions with uncanny precision. And as the rainy nights turned into cold mornings, Emily prepared herself for the inevitable confrontation, not through words or accusations, but through the culmination of her strategy, a scenario that would expose Daniel, destroy his credibility, and force him to face the consequences of the lies he had spun with such confidence. And she reflected on the irony that the man who believed in dominance through secrecy had, in reality, been completely vulnerable all along. And by the time he realized the extent of the collapse around him, it would be too late, and Emily would remain the silent architect of his ruin, a quiet storm that had rewritten the rules of justice in her favor. And as she closed her laptop that night, rain still tapping against the windowpane, she felt the electric thrill of control, a surge of power tempered by patience, knowing that the journey had only begun but already promised devastation, of the kind that lingers, the kind that changes lives. And in that moment, Emily embraced the truth she had learned. Revenge is not about spectacle. It is about strategy, timing, and the quiet knowledge that when you have been wronged, the most terrifying weapon is often the one wielded without visible fury, but with absolute precision, because the world will see only the collapse, not the hand that guided it. The morning after Emily executed her first calculated move, the city seemed unchanged, the sun reflecting off the glass towers with the same indifferent brilliance, as if oblivious to the quiet storm brewing in the heart of one apartment. Yet inside, the tension was tangible, an invisible force tightening around Daniel's world, because he had begun noticing inconsistencies he could not explain: emails sent to wrong recipients, a subtle shift in conversations with colleagues, and while he tried to maintain control, a creeping unease gnawed at him, a whisper of doubt that made him question loyalties he had always taken for granted. And Emily, with her newfound mastery over observation, sensed the exact moment when panic would begin to replace arrogance, when the carefully constructed armor of charm and confidence would start cracking under the weight of his own secrets. And she watched him at a networking event, blending effortlessly into the crowd, laughing at jokes he barely remembered telling, unaware that every interaction was being mirrored, every hidden glance catalogued, as she had begun expanding her reach, subtly engaging people he had wronged professionally, planting seeds of mistrust, nudging confidences in her favor, a psychological symphony composed so delicately that he remained blind to its orchestration. Yet the tension escalated, because Emily realized that to truly dismantle him, she needed more than suspicion. She needed evidence so undeniable that even his staunchest allies could no longer defend him. And so she spent nights combing through records, financial statements, and digital trails, piecing together a network of deceit that linked not only Daniel but also his accomplices, creating a map of betrayal that stretched far beyond her personal heartbreak. And in the process, she discovered that Daniel's arrogance was not only personal but contagious, infecting everyone around him with blind loyalty and a belief that secrecy equaled invincibility. And this realization fueled her strategy, because Emily understood that the collapse would be more devastating if it appeared sudden, an avalanche triggered by invisible pressure rather than a visible hand. And she took meticulous care to cultivate subtle doubts among his circle, whispered hints, questions raised at opportune moments, suggestions of betrayal hidden in casual conversations, while always remaining distant, untouchable. Because the genius of her approach lay in invisibility, in the patient accumulation of cracks that would eventually fracture the entire facade. And she also began documenting his interactions with his lover, the friend who had betrayed her, collecting screenshots, notes, and recordings that captured not only infidelity but manipulation, emotional coercion, and an arrogance that Emily intended to expose in full, turning private sins into public inevitabilities. And each night she sat in the glow of her laptop, mapping strategy like a general, preparing for a battle she had long since known she would win. And yet, even as she moved closer to the inevitable confrontation, Emily experienced a strange dichotomy. The satisfaction of power mingled with the lingering pain of betrayal, the realization that revenge, while intoxicating, did not erase the scars of deceit, and in those moments, she allowed herself brief reflection, imagining the faces of those who would be blindsided, the gasps of shock when the perfect image of Daniel disintegrated under the weight of undeniable truth, because she had come to understand that the most cruel and effective revenge is not delivered in rage, but in revelation, a controlled exposure that strips away illusions with surgical precision. And she began rehearsing scenarios in her mind, anticipating his reactions, studying human psychology to predict the exact moment when the shock would reach its peak. Knowing that timing was as crucial as content, because a revelation too early or too late could diminish its impact, and she also took pleasure in seeing small victories unfold. A colleague questioning Daniel's honesty in a casual lunch, a business partner hesitating over a minor contract, a friend's expression flickering with suspicion when Daniel's words seemed inconsistent. Subtle yet satisfying confirmations that the avalanche had begun, and as days passed, Emily's presence remained undetected, her calm demeanor masking the storm she had unleashed, a quiet puppeteer pulling strings with meticulous care. And one evening, she orchestrated a private dinner, inviting Daniel's lover under the guise of friendship, creating an environment charged with subtle tension, allowing for slips and confessions that she recorded without his knowledge, and the thrill of anticipation surged within her as she realized that his overconfidence had led him into the perfect trap, because he truly believed his secrets would remain buried. And Emily allowed herself a quiet smile as she watched him falter, the cracks in his composure widening with every seemingly casual question, every pointed look, every hint that someone was watching, someone who knew, someone who could dismantle the life he had so arrogantly curated. And she continued building layers of exposure, contacting distant relatives, curious acquaintances, and influential colleagues, planting just enough information to create an intricate web of suspicion without revealing herself, ensuring that the unraveling would appear organic, a natural consequence of his hubris. And she also began preparing for the ultimate confrontation, a final revelation that would merge personal betrayal with professional ruin, an orchestrated disaster that left no refuge, no ally unscathed, no corner untouched. Because Emily understood that for revenge to be complete, it must leave a mark that echoes, a lesson carved into the memory of the betrayer. And during this period, she discovered a strength she had never known, an unshakable focus fueled by pain, patience, and intelligence, the kind of determination that transforms heartbreak into power. And she embraced it fully, becoming the embodiment of calm control, a storm contained within a perfectly measured exterior, while Daniel, oblivious, continued his daily life, unaware that every interaction, every decision, every secret he had relied upon, was being dismantled incrementally, like a house of cards, waiting for a single breath to bring it down. And Emily's final steps involved integrating her findings into a compelling narrative, a story of betrayal so complete and thorough that when revealed, it would leave Daniel gasping at the reality he had never anticipated. And she rehearsed every detail, considering timing, presentation, and psychological impact, because she understood that the art of revenge is not merely in exposing wrongdoing, but in choreographing the revelation to maximize the effect, the shock, the devastation, the awe. And as she prepared for the culmination, she also reflected on her own transformation. The woman who had once been naive, heartbroken, and reactive had evolved into a master of patience, observation, and strategic execution. And this realization gave her an almost cinematic satisfaction, knowing that while pain had led her to this path, wisdom and control would define its conclusion. And in those quiet moments before the final act, Emily felt a surge of anticipation, a thrill that coursed through her like electricity, because she knew that when the time came, Daniel would face the consequences of his arrogance in a way he could never have imagined, and every lie, every betrayal, every manipulation would be mirrored back upon him, a perfect reflection of the chaos he had sown. And she smiled, knowing that the storm had been crafted not out of hate, but out of justice, precision, and the unrelenting pursuit of equilibrium. And as the night descended, she checked her digital network one last time, ensuring that every detail, every carefully placed piece of information, every record of indiscretion, was ready to be revealed at the precise moment, because Emily understood that patience is the ultimate weapon, and power wielded with calculated restraint is far more devastating than brute force. And she leaned back, breathing in the quiet of her apartment, the rain outside falling in rhythmic certainty, a mirror to the meticulous planning that had guided her through months of careful observation, manipulation, and preparation. And she realized that she had become both observer and executor, a force of inevitability. And when Daniel's world finally began to crumble, he would not only lose control but also comprehend, perhaps too late, the magnitude of underestimating someone he had believed powerless. And as she closed her laptop, the city lights reflecting in her eyes, Emily felt the calm before the storm, a serene anticipation for the moment when all patience, strategy, and precision would converge, and Daniel, blind to the meticulous orchestration, remained trapped in a reality where every move he thought concealed was in fact exposed. And the ultimate act of revenge, the crescendo of months of calculated preparation, waited just beyond the horizon, poised to strike with undeniable force. And Emily knew that once it was complete, nothing would ever be the same, not for him, not for those complicit in his deception, and perhaps, most importantly, not for her, because she had emerged from betrayal not as a victim, but as a master of consequence, orchestrating justice in its most precise, terrifying, and cinematic form. The morning sun streamed through the blinds, casting long, thin shadows across Emily's apartment. But inside her mind, there was no light or shadow, only clarity, a precise focus on the inevitable moment when Daniel would finally begin to realize that the life he had so arrogantly taken for granted was slipping through his fingers. And that day began subtly, like a flicker in the corner of his vision, when an unexpected email arrived at his work inbox, revealing discrepancies in accounts he had meticulously thought secured. And he froze for a moment, reading the message twice, a prickle of unease crawling down his spine, because the numbers didn't add up. The trail of evidence was coherent and undeniable, yet he had no idea who had sent it, and Emily, safely observing from a distance, allowed herself a quiet smile, because the first layer of his unraveling had begun, and it wasn't just professionally, it was personal, because she had also ensured that whispers of his infidelity were circulating among his closest friends and confidants. Subtle remarks that hinted at betrayals, double lives, secret meetings, and while he laughed them off publicly, privately, a seed of doubt began to grow. And as the days passed, Emily orchestrated a series of small confrontations without ever appearing as an antagonist, arranging accidental meetings, strategically timed messages, and carefully leaked social media posts that created tension among his circle, so that Daniel, the master manipulator, began questioning the loyalty of those around him, wondering if everyone was conspiring against him, unaware that he was the architect of his own paranoia. And Emily documented every slip, every hesitation, every flicker of guilt and fear, creating a timeline of psychological pressure so exact that she could predict his next move with eerie precision. And during this period, she also deepened her understanding of human behavior, noticing the way his gaze lingered too long on certain faces, how his hands betrayed subtle tremors when confronted with contradictions, how his voice faltered when he believed himself unobserved, and each observation became another tool in her arsenal, another brick in the foundation of his eventual downfall. And then came a carefully constructed dinner party, innocuous in appearance, intimate enough to seem casual, where she invited Daniel, his lover, and several mutual acquaintances, creating an environment charged with tension that he could not recognize. And there, Emily began a psychological ballet, guiding conversations to reveal contradictions, planting questions in the minds of others, watching the subtle panic flare in his expression as he realized his web of deceit had cracks too large to ignore. And while everyone else appeared blissfully unaware, Emily noted every micro-expression, every brief exchange, every sign that the carefully constructed illusion of his control was beginning to crumble, because she understood that the most devastating power comes not from confrontation, but from the slow, inevitable exposure that leaves no escape. And over the following weeks, she escalated her strategy, creating situations where Daniel's missteps were unavoidable, orchestrating scenarios in which colleagues discovered discrepancies, friends noticed inconsistencies, and his lover's loyalty wavered under the weight of truths Emily subtly introduced, all while maintaining the appearance of innocence and oblivion, a masterful disguise that allowed her to move freely within the chaos she was creating. And as the walls closed in, Daniel's arrogance transformed into desperation, his charm giving way to paranoia, as he began questioning every smile, every word, every gesture of those around him. And Emily, ever patient, allowed this internal disintegration to continue, because she knew that the most effective revenge is psychological as much as it is physical, and she wanted him to feel the collapse from within, to understand that trust, once broken, can never be rebuilt. And during this period, she also refined her narrative, creating a web of evidence so intricate that it encompassed every betrayal, every secret, every lie, and she prepared for the moment when all these threads would converge, when the meticulously plotted exposure would become irresistible, undeniable, catastrophic. And in the midst of this, she also ensured that she preserved her own life, maintaining appearances, keeping her social circle intact, all the while operating like a ghost, unseen and undetected, which gave her both protection and satisfaction, because she realized that the true power of revenge is invisibility, the kind that makes collapse inevitable without revealing the hand that guided it. And Emily also discovered the thrill of strategic patience, the intoxicating clarity that comes from controlling outcomes without visible force, feeling a quiet pride in the precision and foresight that had guided her through months of careful observation. And then came the first public confrontation, subtle, yet devastating. orchestrated at a professional gathering where Daniel's credibility was at stake. And as he fumbled, attempting to defend discrepancies that Emily had planted, the room subtly shifted, colleagues exchanging glances, doubts forming in the minds of those who had once admired him, and Emily watched, invisible, as panic and confusion replaced confidence, savoring the first taste of public unraveling, knowing it was only the beginning, because she had planned for the crescendo, the moment when every misstep would align perfectly with the psychological pressure she had built. And as the days turned into nights, she continued her campaign with relentless precision, contacting old acquaintances, strategically revealing truths to people who had influence over Daniel's social and professional world, creating a network of pressure that left him increasingly isolated, desperate, and vulnerable. And she also ensured that his lover, who had been his secret escape, began questioning her role, subtly guided by Emily's careful nudges, so that the betrayal's emotional impact would compound, leaving him exposed on every front. And as Emily observed, she reflected on the nature of human arrogance, realizing that the very traits that had made Daniel powerful, confidence, charm, manipulation, were the same traits that made him predictable and susceptible. And she exploited this knowledge to perfection, orchestrating encounters that would trigger stress, miscalculations, and ultimately, the loss of control. And during this time, Emily herself transformed further, her patience and observation honing her into a figure of almost cinematic precision, blending empathy with ruthlessness, emotion with calculation, heart with strategy. And she recognized that the power of revenge is amplified when the execution is invisible until the moment of revelation, leaving the betrayer blindsided by consequences they could neither anticipate nor evade. And one evening, as she reviewed the results of weeks of careful planning, Emily orchestrated a private revelation, a moment where a close confidant of Daniel, carefully aligned with her guidance, would confront him with evidence he could not deny. And she watched from afar as the confrontation unfolded, seeing panic and disbelief ripple across his face, hearing the faltering in his voice as every lie he had spun returned to him like a boomerang. And in that moment, Emily felt a mixture of triumph and solemnity, knowing that while she had engineered this downfall, the human cost was undeniable, and yet, it was necessary, because justice, when administered with precision, leaves no room for doubt, no avenue for evasion. And as the confrontation concluded, she prepared for the final phase, where personal betrayal and public exposure would converge, ensuring that Daniel would face consequences on every possible level, a culmination of months of observation, strategy, and quiet execution. And in the weeks that followed, the unraveling accelerated, colleagues distancing themselves, friends questioning loyalty, business deals faltering, and his lover withdrawing support, all perfectly orchestrated through Emily's careful manipulation of perception and reality, creating a crescendo of collapse that left Daniel scrambling, desperate for solutions that no longer existed. And Emily observed, unmoved externally but internally satisfied, because she understood that the final act was near, the moment when the culmination of months of planning would reach a climax so devastating that there would be no recovery. And she meticulously coordinated the final evidence package, a combination of digital records, personal messages, and carefully timed social interactions, ensuring that the exposure was complete, comprehensive, and undeniable, leaving no refuge, no ally, no possibility of escape. And as the day approached for the final revelation, Emily reflected on the journey, the months of quiet observation, strategic manipulation, and psychological orchestration, recognizing the strength she had gained, the clarity of purpose she had maintained, and the power inherent in patience, precision, and intelligence. And when the moment arrived, it was almost anticlimactic in its perfection. Daniel, confronted simultaneously by colleagues, friends, and the undeniable record of betrayal, froze. Disbelief and panic etched across his face, as the reality of his arrogance and deception settled around him like a crushing weight. And Emily, after watching quietly from the periphery, felt the quiet satisfaction of inevitability, the realization that every calculation, every observation, every moment of patience had brought them to this apex. And in that instant, the culmination of months of strategic orchestration became complete. Daniel's carefully constructed world shattered in ways he could neither prevent nor repair. A masterclass in revenge executed with precision, invisibility, and control. And Emily, having transformed herself from a betrayed lover into a silent architect of consequence, knew that the journey had ended. And yet, the lessons, the power, the satisfaction of precise, patient justice would remain with her forever, a testament to the fact that betrayal can be met not with chaos, but with calm, strategic inevitability. And as she closed the chapter, watching Daniel face the consequences he had so long evaded, she understood fully that the art of revenge lies not in fury, but in mastery, patience, and timing, and that those who underestimate the quiet power of an observant, strategic mind do so at their own peril. because inevitability, when designed with precision, is the most devastating weapon of all. The city lights flickered against the rain-slick streets as Emily watched from the shadows, a silent observer to a world she had quietly taken control of. And that night, the reality of Daniel's crumbling existence began to reach its full intensity. Because what had started as subtle doubts and minor inconveniences now escalated into undeniable, public consequences, a tidal wave of exposure that he could neither evade nor manipulate. And as Emily followed his every move, noting the tremor in his voice during calls, the hesitation in meetings, the way colleagues' eyes lingered on him with suspicion, she realized that the months of preparation, patience, and psychological orchestration had coalesced into the perfect storm, one that he had unknowingly helped construct through arrogance, deceit, and blind confidence. And she had ensured that every ally he once trusted had a reason to question him. Every professional connection now teetered on the edge of mistrust, and every personal relationship he had relied on was subtly tainted by whispers she had planted, because Emily understood that true revenge is not a single moment of confrontation, but a sustained, layered dismantling that leaves no refuge, no sanctuary, and no possibility of repair. And that night, the first cracks began to widen visibly. As Daniel stumbled through interactions he had once dominated with effortless charm, missteps becoming more frequent, contradictions spilling into conversations, his previously flawless demeanor now marred by uncertainty. And Emily watched, her pulse steady, as he attempted to regain control, but found that every maneuver she anticipated had already countered him, every reaction calculated and rendered ineffective by her foresight. And she orchestrated further pressure, ensuring that even casual observers noted his faltering, carefully leaking evidence of betrayal to trusted colleagues, friends, and distant family, while maintaining her own guise of innocence. And the brilliance of her strategy lay in the seamless invisibility of her movements, because while Daniel experienced chaos, Emily remained the calm, almost imperceptible architect of it all, her satisfaction growing with each subtle shift, each moment of hesitation he displayed. And she also orchestrated a personal reckoning, arranging private encounters that would force him to confront the emotional consequences of his actions, the guilt of betrayal, the loss of trust, and the awareness that someone he had believed powerless now held total control. And Daniel, increasingly desperate, began making mistakes that amplified the consequences. Contracts mishandled, casual comments twisted by observers into proof of duplicity, alliances strained under the weight of doubt she had carefully seeded, and even his lover, once an ally in his deceit, began questioning the stability of their secret world, unsure whether remaining with him was worth the growing evidence of duplicity. And Emily, maintaining the perfect balance of detachment and precision, documented every reaction, every faltering gesture, every fleeting expression of panic, creating a psychological record that was as powerful as the financial and social consequences she had orchestrated. And she began preparing for the ultimate culmination, the point where all aspects of his betrayal, personal, professional, and emotional would converge, leaving him exposed in every arena, a moment of total reckoning. And she meticulously coordinated the convergence, social, digital, and professional channels aligned, evidence carefully timed to appear simultaneously, interactions engineered to maximize impact, all while she remained unseen, untouchable, the quiet force behind the inevitable collapse. And as the days progressed, the tension reached a near unbearable pitch, because Daniel, sensing that the walls were closing in, began to act erratically, flustered, making miscalculations that Emily anticipated with near-perfect precision. And in these moments of chaos, she allowed herself brief flashes of satisfaction, because each stumble, each faltering attempt to regain control, each moment of fear in his eyes was proof that her strategy, her patience, and her understanding of human psychology were succeeding beyond expectation. And the final sequence was approaching, meticulously prepared, a public confrontation disguised as a social event, where colleagues, friends, and even distant family would witness a revelation so complete that it could not be ignored or rationalized away. And Daniel, unaware of the trap, arrived confident, as always, believing his charm and intellect sufficient to navigate any situation. Yet Emily, observing every detail, had accounted for every potential maneuver, every word, every possible attempt at damage control, and she allowed the event to unfold naturally, letting human curiosity and guilt do their work while the evidence, carefully curated and released at precise intervals, cascaded around him like an unstoppable current. And the initial moments of realization were subtle glances, micro-expressions, fleeting hesitations, but quickly escalated as the audience began to piece together the scope of deception, betrayal, and manipulation. And Daniel, for the first time in years, experienced the full weight of vulnerability, his voice faltering, his body tense, his confidence shattered, while Emily observed quietly, noting every reaction, every flicker of emotion, her satisfaction tempered by the gravity of the moment. because revenge, while thrilling, is also a responsibility, an art, a measure of control that must be exercised with care and precision. And as the revelations mounted, the social pressure intensified. Colleagues whispered, friends exchanged glances, and even bystanders unfamiliar with the details sensed the unraveling. A collapse so complete it left Daniel scrambling, desperate for solutions that no longer existed, and Emily, maintaining perfect composure, guided the sequence subtly, nudging conversations, allowing the evidence to speak for itself while preserving her invisibility, because the power of her approach lay in the inevitability of exposure. The orchestration of consequence without ever revealing the guiding hand. And as the climax reached its apex, Daniel's facade crumbled completely, every relationship strained, every professional connection compromised, every personal betrayal laid bare, and he was left isolated, vulnerable, and fully exposed. A man who had believed himself untouchable now facing the devastating reality of underestimating someone he had once betrayed. And in that moment, Emily reflected on the journey, the months of careful observation, the strategic patience, the meticulous orchestration, recognizing that she had transformed herself in the process. From a heartbroken lover into a master of precision, patience, and psychological insights. And as Daniel attempted to regain some semblance of control, fumbling through apologies, explanations, and denials, she observed with quiet satisfaction, knowing that the lesson had been delivered, the power of careful, patient, and strategic action demonstrated in full, and the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place as she ensured that every evidence trail, every revelation, and every consequence aligned to leave no ambiguity, no refuge, no possibility of escape, because she understood fully that revenge, when executed with precision, is as much about timing and invisibility as it is about the exposure of wrongdoing. And as the evening concluded, with Daniel fully exposed and the consequences irreversible, Emily allowed herself a rare moment of reflection, considering not just the destruction of his carefully constructed world, but also the transformation within herself, the empowerment that had arisen from heartbreak, the clarity that patience, observation, and precision can bring. And she realized that the most devastating revenge is not born of anger alone, but of intelligence, control, and the careful orchestration of inevitability. And as she walked away from the scene, unseen, unchallenged, a quiet architect of justice, she understood fully that the storm she had created had delivered both consequences and lessons, leaving Daniel with the inescapable truth of his own actions, and leaving her with the profound satisfaction of mastery, a testament to the fact that when wronged, the most powerful response is not immediate fury, but calculated, patient, and precise execution that ensures that every deception is exposed, every betrayal punished, and every arrogant assumption irrevocably shattered. And in the quiet aftermath, as she observed the fallout from a distance, Emily knew that her journey had reached its peak, a cinematic, devastating conclusion, 2 months of meticulous strategy, and that, in the realm of betrayal and revenge, control, patience, and foresight are the ultimate weapons. And as she disappeared into the nights, leaving Daniel to confront the irreversible consequences of his arrogance, she reflected once more on the truth she had lived. Revenge is an art, invisibility is power, and inevitability, when carefully orchestrated, is unstoppable. The air was thick with tension as Daniel staggered through the aftermath of the revelation. His once pristine world fractured beyond repair, every colleague, friend, and family member who had trusted him now questioning his integrity, while whispers, glances, and half-hidden smirks reminded him that nothing he had done could be hidden or excused. And Emily, observing from a distance, allowed herself a quiet satisfaction, the culmination of months of planning and patience, finally realized, because the beauty of her revenge was not merely in exposing his betrayal but in orchestrating a collapse so complete, so unavoidable, that it left him with nothing, no credibility, no relationships, no power, and no refuge from the consequences of his arrogance. And yet, amidst the chaos he faced, Emily also orchestrated the final emotional reckoning, arranging encounters where Daniel's lover, long complicit in his duplicity, finally confronted him, exposing the emotional manipulation, the deceit, and the betrayal that had remained hidden even from those closest to him. And as he faced the simultaneous collapse of his professional empire and personal illusions, the full weight of his actions struck him, a crushing realization that his arrogance, secrecy, and manipulations had left him utterly exposed and alone, while Emily, masterfully maintaining her invisibility, observed the psychological impact with almost clinical detachment, taking note of every falter, every stammer, every subtle flicker of panic, and she allowed the natural consequences of human guilt, shame, and social judgment to cascade around him, a carefully choreographed domino effect of ruin that was as much about psychology as it was about exposure. And in these moments, she reflected on the months of preparation, the meticulous cataloging of his lies, the careful nudges to colleagues and friends, the invisible threads of influence that had guided the collapse, and she realized that revenge, when executed with patience, precision, and strategic invisibility, is more powerful than rage, because it allows the betrayer to witness, firsthand, the consequences of their arrogance, manipulation, and cruelty. And as Daniel tried to regain footing, attempting apologies, explanations, and desperate justifications, Emily remained unseen, allowing the weight of truth to do the work she had orchestrated, while simultaneously reinforcing the psychological impact by ensuring that every revelation reached the maximum number of people who mattered in his life. And over the following days, she carefully monitored the ripple effects, strained professional relationships, fractured friendships, lost opportunities, and the increasing isolation of a man who had believed himself untouchable, all unfolding exactly as she had predicted, every domino falling in sequence, every flaw she had exploited manifesting in real, irreversible consequences. And yet, she also observed the personal transformation within herself, a deep, empowering recognition that she had evolved from heartbreak into mastery, that betrayal had not broken her but had sharpened her focus, honed her intelligence, and strengthened her patience, turning a victim into a force of inevitability. And as Daniel's world crumbled, she orchestrated the final social reckoning, a dinner where all involved parties, friends, colleagues, and those unknowingly complicit, witnessed the culmination of his deceit, the emotional and social consequences so fully exposed that he could not deny, manipulate, or evade. And in that setting, she allowed a moment of silent observation, watching the subtle panic, the faltering confidence, and the dawning comprehension that he had miscalculated entirely, that every relationship, every alliance, every carefully constructed facade had been rendered fragile, unstable, and ultimately meaningless, while she remained composed, calm, and untouchable, the architect of consequence and master of inevitability. And as the evening concluded, Emily reflected on the artistry of her revenge, understanding that the precision of timing, the patient accumulation of small pressures, and the strategic orchestration of exposure had created a collapse far more devastating than any immediate confrontation could have achieved, because the slow, calculated unraveling had allowed Daniel to experience the full emotional and psychological weight of his betrayal, a lesson delivered with surgical accuracy. And in the quiet aftermath, she ensured that all traces of evidence, documentation, and recordings were securely preserved, a safeguard against any future attempts at denial or revision, because a master of consequence leaves no possibility for escape. And over the following weeks, she observed the ongoing fallout, noting how his credibility remained irreparably damaged, how alliances and relationships dissolved, and how even casual acquaintances who had once admired him now viewed him with suspicion, disappointment, and contempt, all while she maintained her life outside the chaos, untouched, free, and empowered, because the brilliance of her strategy lay in invisibility, the ability to guide outcomes without being seen. And as she reflected on the journey from betrayal to mastery, she recognized that true revenge is an art form, one that demands patience, observation, intelligence, and the willingness to let consequences unfold with precision. And Emily also understood that the psychological aspect of her plan, the subtle manipulation of perception, the orchestration of social and professional pressures, and the careful alignment of timing was as crucial as the factual exposure of lies and betrayal, because a collapse is far more powerful when the betrayer experiences it from within, feeling the weight of every misstep, every manipulation, every arrogance, and every broken trust. And in these moments, Daniel's full comprehension of his failure became evident. A man who once believed himself untouchable, now utterly exposed, every secret unveiled, every lie mirrored back, every betrayal accounted for. And Emily, from her quiet vantage, allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction, tempered by solemn reflection, because revenge, while empowering, is also a responsibility, a testament to control, patience, and strategic foresight. And she knew that the culmination of her plan had achieved its objective in full. Daniel was broken, exposed, and faced with the consequences of his arrogance, deceit, and betrayal. And in the final orchestration, she ensured that his lover, colleagues, and friends understood the full extent of the duplicity, the emotional manipulation, and the arrogance that had guided his actions, leaving no ambiguity, no refuge, and no possibility of rationalization. And as she stepped back from the intricate web she had created, Emily recognized that her transformation was complete. The woman who had been heartbroken, betrayed, and underestimated had become a master of strategy, patience, and inevitability, a force invisible until it struck. And in the quiet aftermath, observing the ruins of Daniel's carefully constructed life, she reflected on the lessons learned, that betrayal can be met, not with chaos, but with precise, calculated consequence, that patience amplifies power, and that intelligence applied with control is far more devastating than raw anger. And as she finally allowed herself to breathe, the rain outside softly tapping against the windows like a rhythm of closure, she addressed you, the viewer, directly. Because if you've watched this journey unfold, you understand the intensity, the strategy, and the patience that it takes to turn heartbreak into mastery. So, take a moment and let me ask, where are you watching this from, and what time is it there? Because this story proves that betrayal can be devastating, but clever, patient, and precise action can transform even the deepest pain into ultimate empowerment. And if you've been captivated, moved, or inspired by Emily's journey, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more cinematic storytelling, and comment below with your thoughts, experiences, or reactions, because sharing your perspective keeps these stories alive. And remember, the quiet power of patience and precision can change everything, just as Emily demonstrated in her unforgettable, cinematic journey of betrayal, strategy, and ultimate revenge.